Hi class, let's get started with our discussion on the cardiovascular system. This PowerPoint is going to focus on both the heart and the blood vessels, and then part 2, the second PowerPoint, is going to focus exclusively on the blood. So, let's dive in. What is our cardiovascular system? Our cardiovascular system is a system that involves the heart and all of the blood vessels. And when we see this term vascular or vasculature usually refers to any blood vessel in the body. So if our cardiovascular system is the heart and the blood vessels, what does that cardiovascular system do for us? It helps us by transporting nutrients from one part of our body to another part of our body. Sometimes these nutrients are important to keep the cells alive. Sometimes these nutrients are waste products. This blood that's being moved through our cardiovascular system is going to be refreshed or rejuvenated in several organs of our body, including the lungs, kidney, intestines, and the livers. Now, as fluids leak out of our cardiovascular system, as we have liquid leak out of our bloodstream and our blood vessels, we have lymphatic vessels that are going to collect the extra fluid that builds up in our body and return that extra fluid into our cardiovascular system. So we have our principal organs of our cardiovascular system shown here on this figure. We have the heart as the main pump. We have the blood vessels that the blood moves through. A principal tissue of our cardiovascular system is going to be the blood itself, which we'll focus on in our next PowerPoint presentation. Within our cardiovascular system, that blood that we move is going to interact with other body systems. With our respiratory system, the blood is going to gain oxygen and lose carbon dioxide. With the digestive system, we are going to have nutrients added to the bloodstream. Within the urinary system, we're going to have waste products removed from the bloodstream. So our cardiovascular system has some key functions that we need to emphasize for you here. One is transport, then we have protection, and then finally regulation. Now what are we transporting? We are transporting any and all nutrients throughout our body, generally speaking. So what are some of the specific nutrients that we transfer? We transfer oxygen and carbon dioxide, the two principal blood gases. We're also going to have waste products generated by the cells. Sometimes these waste products are a byproduct of protein or lipid breakdown or carbohydrate breakdown. Other times these waste products are going to be drug metabolites or leftovers as we process the drugs or potentially alcohol or other chemicals that we ingest. And we also transport hormones throughout our bloodstream for our endocrine system. We also use our cardiovascular system for protection. We have cells within our cardiovascular system that are going to help protect our body from infection. The principal cell type is going to be our white blood cell. And then finally, we also have regulation. We are going to use this cardiovascular system to help maintain homeostasis in our body. And when I use this term homeostasis, I mean a relatively constant internal environment. So, class, concept checked. Which of the following is not a primary function of the cardiovascular system? You can rewind the video. You can check your notes, check your textbook, pause it, and get me an answer right now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The correct answer is reproduction. Reproduction is primarily a function of the reproductive system. For our cardiovascular system, protection, distribution, and regulation are primary functions. Moving on. As we look at the blood moving throughout the body, that blood is going to start at the heart, and from the heart, anything that carries the blood away from the heart is going to be called an artery. So I want you to think of arteries away. So we go from the heart, and then away from the heart through the arteries, and then we keep moving farther and farther away through tiny air tubes called arterioles. Both arteries and arterioles do not have any gas or nutrient exchange taking place. Those arterioles are going to get smaller and smaller until we go to the capillaries. The capillaries are the smallest blood vessels of our body, and this is where we have lots of gas and nutrient and fluid exchange taking place. After the capillaries, we're going to reverse course, and we're going to start heading back to the heart. We'll head back to the heart starting with the small veins known as the venules, then we'll go to the veins, and then finally, boom, we're in the heart. So let's talk about these arteries and arterioles. Both arteries and arterioles are going to carry blood away from the heart. Now, these arteries and arterioles have three main layers to the walls. There's a very thin inner epithelium, sometimes referred to as the tunica intima, And this epithelium that lines the inside of our arteries also lines the inside of arterioles, capillaries, veins, and the chambers of the heart. This is a continuous layer of tissue that's super duper slippery. And we want it to be super duper slippery so that we don't have any blood clots form, or we minimize the amount of blood clots that form in our bodies. We also have some smooth muscle in our arteries. And the arteries in particular have lots and lots of smooth muscle because they need to withstand large changes or fluctuation in blood pressures. The veins have much thinner layers of smooth muscle, and this smooth muscle will contract and relax to help regulate our blood pressure. And then finally we have some outer connective tissues that help anchor our arteries in place and give them structural integrity. You can think of the arteriole as a tiny artery, and these arterioles are very numerous and also aid the arteries in regulating our blood pressure, in addition to transporting blood away from the heart to the capillary bed. Capillaries are microscopic. Generally speaking, if we are looking at a capillary is going to allow 1, maybe 2 red blood cells to travel through it at a time. These capillaries have one layer of epithelial tissue that's continuous with the inner lining of the arteries and arterioles. So that continuous layer is just going to continue on, and it's super slippery. And because it doesn't have the outer layers that the arteries and arterioles have, our capillaries are going to have a lot of fluid and nutrient exchange. Our capillaries have a very, very large surface area because there are so many small capillary tubes. The combined cross-sectional surface area of our capillaries is larger than the veins or the arteries or the arterioles and the venules. It's the largest of any blood vessel type. If I was to compare and contrast an artery with a vein, the artery itself has that very thick, smooth muscle layer, and then the vein is very thin and does not have any smooth muscle layers in it. And then if we looked at a vein on the other side, after the capillary bed, the vein also has that very thin, smooth muscle layer. And the blood will go through the artery, to the capillary bed, back to the heart through the vein. Venules are going to be the blood vessels that take the blood away from the capillary beds. And venules and veins both have 3 layers to them. They have that thin inner epithelium, just like the arteries, arterioles, and capillaries do. But they are also going to have a smooth muscle layer. And saying that this is a thick, smooth muscle layer is a bit of a misnomer. Compared to arteries, the smooth muscle layer of veins and venules is quite thin. Let's back up a slide here. So compare and contrast. See how thick that layer is in the artery compared to how much thinner it is in the vein. Now, yes, this layer is thicker than it is in the capillaries, but compared to the arteries, which have the thickest smooth muscle layer, the smooth muscle in a vein is not that thick. Veins are going to always carry blood towards the heart, arteries away, and then veins to the heart. And our veins also need to work against gravity. Many veins need to go from our feet and our legs up to our heart against gravity. And to help with this process, we're going to have one-way valves in our veins. And these one-way valves are going to help the blood to always move towards the heart. If I back up here, you can kind of see a membrane right here. And this membrane inside of the vein, or this loop, represents a one-way valve. And these one-way valves keep the blood flowing one direction through the veins against gravity. Every once in a while, particularly in the lower appendages, so the legs, the one-way valves in the veins will go bad, and that can cause varicose veins or spider veins to develop in individuals. So here's that figure again. We have the artery, there we have the vein. All right, let's move on. Which blood vessel can contract? Concept check. Which can contract with the most force? Is it the artery, arteriole, capillary, venule, or vein? Go ahead and rewind the video, or you can pause it and check your notes or your textbook. Get me an answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The correct answer is A. Artery can contract with the most force, and that is because arteries have the thickest layer of smooth muscle compared to any of the other blood vessel types. Let's continue on. If we look at the heart is the main pump of the cardiovascular system. There are some secondary pumps that help move the blood to the vein, particularly the skeletal muscle pumps, but the heart is what does the vast majority of the pumping of the fluids. And you can think of the heart as a double pump. It has 2 sides, a left and a right side, that work in conjunction with each other. Now, the main kind of tissue that makes up the heart is called cardiac muscle tissue. And sometimes this is going to also be referred to as myocardium. Myo is a prefix meaning muscle, cardium or card meaning heart, or cardio meaning heart. So this word literally means the muscle of heart, or heart muscle. Now this myocardium, this heart, is going to be surrounded by a sac called a pericardium. Peri means perimeter, cardium meaning heart. The pericardium sac goes around the perimeter of the heart, and as the heart will have the two left and the right side. These left and right sides of the heart are separated by a septum that goes down the middle. There's a septum that separates the chambers on the top, and a septum that will separate the chambers on the bottom. Those are known as the interatrial septums and the interventricular septums. The chambers on top are always referred to as atria. The ones on bottom are always referred to as ventricles. We have 2 on top, 2 on the bottom, 4 total chambers in the heart. And we also have 2 sets of valves in the heart. We have the atrioventricular valves that separate the atria from the ventricles. Those are abbreviated AV valves. And then we have the semilunar valves. Those semilunar valves are going to help to send blood away from the heart. There's one semilunar valve for the aorta and another semilunar valve for the pulmonary trunk. And as the semilunar valves and the AV valves are snapping shut, they produce the lub-dub sounds of a typical heartbeat. Here we can see some surface anatomy of the heart. We're going to have the inferior vena cava down here and the superior vena cava up here, both sending blood into the right atrium. And from the right atrium, blood will then enter into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, that blood is going to flow upwards to the pulmonary trunk. From the pulmonary trunk, it will head to the pulmonary arteries that take the blood to the lungs. Pulmonary is a fancy term for lungs. So we go from the pulmonary artery away from the heart to the lungs, where the blood picks up oxygen and then is sent back to the heart in the pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins converge at the left atrium. From the left atrium, blood flows down into the left ventricle and then will flow upwards through the aorta. So let's talk about that again while we're looking at the interior structure of the heart. We are going to send blood to the right atrium. From the right atrium, we'll flow past the right AV valve down into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, we'll send blood upwards past the pulmonary semilunar valve to the pulmonary trunk, pulmonary arteries, to the lungs, to the pulmonary veins, to the right atrium. From the right atrium, we will go past the right AV valve, down, and then behind here, we can't see the structure, but back here, behind here, the left ventricle sends blood past the aortic semilunar valve to the aortic arch. So here we have the steps of blood flowing through the heart that I've just explained on the last 2 slides. This is written out for us in order, and this is a cyclical process. You need to have the pathway of blood flow through the heart memorized. That's standard practice, to memorize the pathway of blood flow through the heart. So for your lecture exam, make sure you memorize that you go from the vena cavas to the right atrium, past the right ventricle, or past the right AV valve to the right ventricle, to the pulmonary arteries, to the lungs, to the pulmonary veins, to the left atrium, left AV valve to left ventricle, from left ventricle past the aortic valve into the aorta, and then the rest of the body, and then back to the heart. Now, as we have blood flowing through the heart, it's important that we have these chambers of the heart contract in a rhythmic fashion. And help these chambers of the heart contract in a rhythmic fashion, we have some special connections between our cardiac muscle tissues or cardiac muscle cells. And those are intercalated discs, which are represented by these black or these dark blue squiggly lines right here. And in these intercalated discs, we have gap junctions, a special cell-to-cell junction. And these gap junctions have tubes that allow for electrical current from one cell to flow directly into the next cell, so that we have a continuous pathway of current flow across the chamber of the heart. Now, if we compare and contrast the left ventricle to the right ventricle, you'll notice that that left ventricle is much more muscular than the right ventricle. Let's back up here. Notice how thick this muscular wall is right here and over here compared to over here. So the left ventricle has a lot more myocardium or cardiac muscle tissue in it compared to the right ventricle. And that's because it needs to pump blood to the entire body. The right ventricle is only going to pump blood through the lungs, through the pulmonary circuit. The left ventricle needs to work a lot harder. It needs to pump blood through the entire systemic circuit. The arteries are also going to be much more muscular than our veins because the arteries need to withstand the high changes in pressure that the left ventricle is exerting on them as the left ventricle pumps blood out through the aorta. Our veins typically have a much thinner wall to them and a much larger empty space or lumen on the inside of them. And this causes our veins to contain a much higher volume of blood compared to the arteries. Now, as our heart is beating, there'll be a contraction phase and a relaxation phase. During the contraction phase, the atria or ventricles will be in systole. So ventricular systole is when the ventricles are contracting. During atrial systole, the atria are contracting. And then dystole is rest, when the specific chamber is resting. Now, when you take somebody's blood pressure and they have the high and low numbers, the high number on someone's blood pressure corresponds to the ventricles contracting, ventricular systole, and that's called the systolic blood pressure. And then the low number on someone's blood pressure, that corresponds to the ventricles relaxing, dystole, and that's why that's called the diastolic blood pressure. So if we looked at someone's blood pressure, the cutoff between healthy blood pressures and being pre-hypertensive is 120 over 80, 120 millimeters of mercury over 80 millimeters of mercury. If somebody's above that pressure threshold, they almost have high blood pressure. I'm having a brain hiccup right now. And if they're below that threshold, they have healthy blood pressures. During this cardiac cycle, we are going to have the two atria contract at the same time. And the two atria will always contract at the same time and push blood down into the two ventricles at the same time. Then the two ventricles contract at the same time. And as the ventricles are contracting, that gives us the lub, the loud noise on the heartbeat. And the AV valves will snap shut, producing the lub noise. And as the ventricles contract, in addition to pushing the AV valves shut, they push the semilunar valves open. The aortic and the pulmonary semilunar valves are pushed open, and blood exits the heart. And then as the ventricles start to relax again, the semilunar valves snap shut, producing the dub sound. To control heartbeat, we're going to have some electrical systems in the heart. We have the sinoatrial or SA node. This SA node is going to be located in the right atrium of the heart. This SA node is oftentimes referred to as the pacemaker of the heart. The SA node determines the overall heartbeat for the patient. If the patient has a defective SA node, the AV node can take over in occasion, but generally speaking, that patient is going to need to have an implant called a pacemaker put into the thoracic cavity to take over the functions of their malfunctioning sinoatrial node. So the SA node is going to depolarize or send an electrical signal away to the atria, causing both atria to contract. The electrical signal then goes to the AV node, the atrioventricular node, and pauses there for half a second. And that half a second pause at the AV node allows for the atria to finish contracting before the ventricles start contracting. After pausing for a split second at the AV node, the electrical signal is going to then pass down through the AV bundle, that goes through the interventricular septum of the heart, to the Purkinje fibers that then cause the heart to contract. This process is illustrated right here. We go from the SA node and cause the atria to contract. Then the signal pauses at the AV node, goes down the bundle branches to the Purkinje fibers that then cause the ventricles to contract. It's worth emphasizing again that within the chambers of a heart, from cardiomyocyte to cardiomyocyte, so from heart muscle cell to heart muscle cell, the electrical signals are going to jump from cell to cell to cell with those little gap junctions that are located at the intercalated discs. And those gap junctions can be shown right here. To review again, the intercalated disc is that dark blue region, and then the dark blue region has many tiny little tubes that connect the cytoplasm of one cell to the next cell. We are also going to be able to control our heartbeat with some external controls outside of the heart. Those are going to be located in our brain and can be impacted by hormones like epinephrine and norepinephrine, also known as adrenaline and noradrenaline. Here's a close-up of those gap junctions within the intercalated disc. So you can see that tubular structure right there that allows for the electrical signal to go from one cell to the next cell. As we are analyzing the heartbeat of a patient, we oftentimes are going to have an ECG, sometimes referred to as an EKG, the electrocardiogram of the heart that monitors the heart muscle electrical activity and how it changes. If we look at an ECG or EKG, there's going to be some characteristic spikes and valleys that are formed. We have our P wave, then the QRS complex, and then the T wave. This P wave corresponds to the SA node depolarizing. Then, during the P wave, the atria are going to be contracting. We're then going to have the QRS complex, and in that QRS complex, so during this big spiky portion, when we have lots and lots of electrical activity, the big parts of the heart are going to be going through lots of electrical changes. The ventricles will start contracting. And then finally, at the end, at the T wave, the ventricles are relaxing. And then the whole process resets itself. Now, as we look at the changes that are going to be going through this ECG, this electrocardiogram, sometimes we have a longer gap between the SA node sending a signal and the AB node sending a signal. And that would cause the PQ gap to be longer in time. Sometimes there's a long ST gap. That would also be an abnormal EKG or ECG. So, class, concept checked. When the right atrium is contracting, which other chamber of the heart will also be contracting at the exact same time? Is it the left atrium, the right ventricle, left ventricle, none of the above, or all of the above? Go ahead and rewind the video to get me an answer, or you can pause it, check your textbook, or check your notes. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If the right atrium of the heart is contracting, the other chamber of the heart that's contracting is going to be the left atrium. When the one atria is contracting, the other atria is contracting. Let's back up here. There we go. So first we'll have the two atria contract when the SA node depolarizes, and then the two ventricles contract at the same time when their Purkinje fibers depolarize. And I think this is a great time to stop this video. We are going to pick up in our next video recording about blood pressure.